I was born in Lancaster County, May 2nd, 1930. And we moved from there to Orangeburg County. And we moved from Orangeburg County to Darlington County. Then we moved from Darlington County to Williamsburg County. And from Williamsburg County to Georgetown County. Then back to Williamsburg County. Then back to Georgetown County. Then back to Williamsburg County and back to Georgetown County to present. So we moved quite a bit. Well, part of it was sharecroppers, and part of it was just natural movement. I started the school at 5 years old in Orangeburg County in a community called Nice's. And the last time I visited there, the two-room schoolhouse was still standing. It was being used as a fellowship hall for the Mount Beulah Pentecostal Holiness Church. The school that I went to had first and second grade in one room and third and fourth grade in the other room. One teacher taught first and second, another teacher taught third and fourth grade. And that's where I started school. One of the earliest things about the Depression that I was told, now I don't really remember this because I was too young, but I was old enough when I got my first pair of shoes to ask, would they break if I stood up in them? Until then I had, apparently if I had any shoes they were hand-me-downs, but this is my first brand new pair of shoes. We usually lived in houses that had what the outside weatherboarding was the only wall, no ceiling. The floors had, the boards had cracks between the boards big enough if you had chickens, you could see the chickens walking under the house. And of course there was no overhead ceiling. And wintertime was pretty cold sleeping, and summertime was pretty hot sleeping. But the houses were very crude, and but we endured. We lived in a society of people that were like ourselves. Nobody didn't think of themselves as being poor. We just didn't have any money. I remember the older folks talking about in Lancaster, it being a cotton mill town. In 1933, President Roosevelt got Congress to pass a bill to ask all the employers to give their employees a 10% raise. And I remember the older folks talking about immediately the cotton mill management in Lancaster cut everybody's pay 10%. The men were making $1 a day. They cut them to 90 cents a day. And then they gave them a 10% raise. So after they got the 10% raise, they were making 99 cents a day instead of $1 a day. And that was one of the remedies. I guess that was one of the early stimulus things that went on. But it didn't benefit the working people very much. And rent was usually paid to the cotton mill ownership, and that took a big portion of their $6 a week paycheck to pay for their rent. Food was not a very plentiful thing. We ate a lot of beans and rice and a lot of corn, like grits and cornbread. I remember as we were sharecropping on Saturdays, thing to do was you had to get out the corn to go to mill, because they had a grits mill where they ground the grits, you know, corn into grits and meal. And you carried enough to the mill on Saturday to make cornbread and grits for the next week. And of course, that corn had to be shucked by hand and shelled by hand because we didn't have a corn sheller. And I don't know whether you're familiar with what a corn sheller is, but it was a hand cranked piece of machinery that it would actually shell the grains of corn off the cob, but we didn't have one of them. We'd used our hands to do that. Mostly we got along pretty good because we didn't know any different. Most of the people we knew were fairly healthy, even though times were tough and food was in short supply at times, but most everybody was in pretty good health. I don't remember being sick at all, hardly, until I was 14 years old before I ever went to a doctor. You know, and I didn't know of anybody going to. My mother had a problem one time. She had to go to the doctor. Had some kind of problem with one of the fingers on her left hand. We did have fever, and I think that was probably due to the fact that almost everybody had a shallow well for water supply, and these wells weren't very deep, because I remember when we lived in Orangeburg County, the house that we moved in had not been built too long, and they didn't have a well. And my dad and some of the other men in the neighborhood dug a well in the backyard, and I can remember them letting me go down in the well. They put me down there so I could be down in the bottom of the well. And it looked to me like it was probably 30 or 40 feet deep, but in actuality, I guess it was only about 12, 15 feet deep. Had a seepage of water in the bottom of it, and that water would seep in there, and it got deep enough you could let a bucket down and get a bucket full, and I think that had a big contribution to the fact that we did have fever. But that was the biggest ailment I remember any of us children ever having. I have one brother, 5 sisters, so we had a big family. One thing that most people we knew had during the depression that they had plenty of was children. The lean years lasted until the United States got into World War II in 1941, and we managed to go to school, graduate from high school, and I was fortunate to attend a few months of business college in Columbia before I had to come home and start work. But I went to work at International Paper Company in 1948 on July the 5th. And I worked on the tugboats that they had at that time that towed pulpwood into Georgetown by barge. And when I was hired, the captain on the tugboat told me he would give me a 30-day trial and let me know whether I would have a job or not. Well, 35 and a half years later, nobody had told me whether I worked out or not, but I retired as the port captain of the marine operation at International Paper. Every year seemed to be a little better than the prior year in our life. We managed, sometime by the skin of our teeth, but we made ends meet and made it through life to this point. In my personal opinion, I think it was kind of like a form of slavery, because you agreed to supply the labor and everything on a small farm for a share of the profits. And it always seemed to work out that the owner got the crop and the worker got to share. But we managed to kind of make ends meet. If you had a good year and everything went well, the weather was good and the crops turned out to be pretty good, if you paid your debt to the owner for your supply, part of the fertilizer and seed and other credit that he extended to you throughout the year, if you managed to pay that off and had $200 or $300 left, that was a good year. That meant that you had enough money to buy clothes to go to school and pay for your books, rental on the books. And usually we got 2 pair of pants and 2 shirts. That was our school clothes, and you wore one and washed one. But sharecropping was a hard way to live, but it was subsistence, and you made it. When we lived in Orangeburg County, my dad had bought a used Model T automobile for $15. And my mother's parents lived in Wittenberg County, over in what is now the Sutton's community. And he said that if we got $1 for gas, we could go visit Grandmama and Granddaddy. So we picked cotton for a good friend of ours, Mr. Jesse Chavis. We called him Uncle Jesse. He told us he would pay us 1 cent a pound to pick cotton. So the 4 of us older children went to the field and we picked 100 pounds of cotton and got $1 to buy the gas to come from Orangeburg County to Wittenberg County to visit our grandparents. That was a family project that we worked at. I don't know whether we really had quite 100 pounds or not. It might have been a pound or 2 short, but he gave us the $1 anyway. And that paid for the gas to come from Orangeburg County to Wittenberg County and go back. I think gas at that time was about 18 cents a gallon. No, it was different places that we lived. And when we changed from Wittenberg County to Georgetown County back and forth, we were living on opposite sides of the county line road. And that meant that we changed schools. So I went to Andrews School for a number of years, and you know, not all consecutive years, but I graduated from Wittenberg High School. Andrews was where you went on Saturday about every 5th or 6th week to get a haircut. And when you got to Andrews, they had a theater, and if you had 12 cents, you could go to the movie. And if you had another quarter so to spend, you could go to the milk bar where all the young people gathered and get to see everybody and be seen. And it was always an enjoyable time, but you didn't get to do that about once every 5th, 6th, 7th week. You know, it wasn't a regular Saturday thing. I can remember when we went to Andrews, and on Saturday evening and Saturday night, people would come to town that had a car, and they would park on the street, on Main Street in Andrews, and just sit in their car and watch the people go up and down the street. That was their entertainment. And I think here recently they had some kind of a drive in Andrews where they drove up and down the streets to celebrate I forget what they called it now. But I remember years back when I was a young fella that people that had a car and could afford the gas, they drove up and down on the main street from what is now Brockington Curve, there where that Exxon station is close to McDonald's, turn around, go back and forth through town, and they might do that 40 or 50 times during the afternoon and early Saturday night. But the big thing was to go to the movie and see a Class B Western. Everybody liked that. I was probably 8 or 9 years old. Anyway, I was in the 4th grade before I ever drank a soft drink. My first soft drink was a 12-ounce Pepsi Cola, and it cost 5 cents. Long about that time was the first time I ever bought cereal, and that was cornflakes. And I still like cornflakes today. And like I said earlier, we eat a lot of lima beans and rice, and lima beans and rice is one of my favorite foods now. I remember the first ice cream cone I had was when I was in the 1st grade, and I started school when I was 5. They had, at a little 2-room schoolhouse, they had some kind of celebration, and somebody made a churn of ice cream, homemade ice cream, and had some cones, and you could get a cone of ice cream for 2 cents. And I had my first 2-cent cone of ice cream at 5 years old. We wore a lot of hand-me-downs. There was people that were kind to us, would give us castaway clothes that their children had outgrown or something. All of us wore hand-me-downs. I was 16 years old when I got my first suit of clothes. It cost $21. I remember that very clearly. It was not really a dress suit, it was like a sports suit. It had a sport coat and pants. I wore that thing a long time. Christmas was usually a time of celebration. We didn't get a whole lot of things, but mainly we got an orange and an apple and some raisins that were still on the stem and had seed in them. And that was the one time a year we got fruit. And I guess I just want to tell y'all my biggest disappointment at Christmas too, by its Christmas season. When we lived in Darlington, I was 6 years old, and I was in the 2nd grade then. And our teacher told us to write a letter to Santa Claus. And I did, because they said Santa Claus was going to come to town on Christmas Eve. Well, Christmas Eve, we went to the town square, and they told us Santa Claus had landed out at the airport, and the fire truck was going to bring him into the town square, and all the children could see Santa Claus. And this was the first time I ever saw anybody dressed up in a Santa Claus suit. Well, the fire truck came in, the siren blowing and the red lights flashing, and they pulled up on the grass there in front of the town square, and they had toys on the fire truck, and Santa Claus greeted everybody with his ho ho ho, and then they said he was going to read some letters to Santa Claus. Well, the first letter he read was from a little girl, and she said she had been a good girl and she would like a doll for Christmas. Well, they called out her name, and they had a spotlight, and they found her in the crowd, and her dad took her up there, and he gave her a doll. Had one up there on the truck. And the next letter he pulled out was from a boy, and he said he had been a good boy and he wanted a bicycle. Well, they had a bicycle on that fire truck, and they gave him the bicycle. Well, the third letter they pulled out was from a little boy who said he'd been a good boy and he wanted a red wagon, and his name was Billy Skipper. Well, my dad picked me up and put me on his shoulder, and they blinded me with the spotlight and took me over to the fire truck. There was a red wagon sitting up there, but Santa Claus didn't give me the red wagon. He gave me a deflated football. And I was disappointed because, you know, there was the red wagon. The boy had got his bicycle, the girl had got her doll, but I got a deflated football. And the sad part about it was when Daddy blew it up, it wouldn't hold air. So I didn't have anything, really. Of course, being 6 years old, you know, I didn't question why Santa Claus didn't land his sled and reindeer in front of the courthouse instead of riding in on a fire truck. You know, I thought that was Santa Claus. And he didn't give me what I asked for, and he gave the other children what they asked for. So I guess that might have been one of the biggest disappointments at Christmas time I ever had, or probably in my life. I tell my wife, maybe that's what's wrong with my personality now. When I was working on the tugboats, I was captain on a tugboat at the time, I saw in the Sunday paper an advertisement from Bush Vegetables that if you sent in 100 labels off of Bush vegetable cans, they would give you a Radio Flyer red wagon. I told the cook on the tugboat, I said, from now on, I want you to save all the labels off the Bush vegetable cans until you get me 100 labels. Well, on a boat, you know, we eat a lot of food, so it didn't take long before he told me, said, Captain, here's the 100 labels you asked me to save. I put them in an envelope and sent them off, and I got a red wagon. And my grandchildren ruined that. Well, I got married in 1956 to a local girl named Mary Robbins, and we've been married 56 years. We have 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters. Our son lives in Columbia. He has 2 girls. Our oldest daughter lives at Myrtle Beach. She has 1 daughter, and her name is Heather. And our youngest daughter lives in Myrtle Beach also. She has 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. And our youngest granddaughter is 15, and she called us last night from Columbia and said she had got her driver's license. My favorite place got to be in Williamsburg County because my mother inherited a piece of property from her dad in Williamsburg County, and I don't know exactly what year, but about 45 years ago, I bought that piece of property from my mother. And my brother bought the piece next to it that our aunt had inherited from Granddaddy, and he built a house out there and lives out there, and we have a house out there also, as well as in Georgetown, and we live out there about half the time. And we also have what the county taxes be as our clubhouse, where we have get-togethers, and our main get-together usually is at Thanksgiving, and we had 70 people out there Thanksgiving Day this year, and we have had 92. And of course we have a family reunion on my wife's side of the family out there the first Sunday in November. We also go out there for New Year's, and I guess that would be my favorite place of all. No, we don't farm. I told my granddaughter last night when she called and said she's got a driver's license. She's 15, and I told her, I said, when I was your age, the only thing I drove was a mule and wagon. And to my knowledge, she's never rode in a mule and wagon. It was lean years during the entire Depression, but people survived because they kind of stuck together. We had time back then to visit, and you had time to consider what other people needed and help them out. On the farm, you know, when we were sharecropping, we would go to one man's farm and help them work, and they would come and help us work. No money was exchanged, but labor was exchanged, and like that you help people out. I can remember one treat that we had, if you could afford it, was iced tea for Sunday dinner. You didn't have iced tea every day, but if you had iced tea for Sunday dinner, that was a real treat. I can remember one lady used to invite us to go home and eat dinner with her after church on Sunday, and she would always say, "We're gonna have iced tea." You know, that was an enticement for us children to more to go. But it was a real treat to have something like that. We kept ice when you had it. Didn't have a refrigerator. You had a hole in the ground with sawdust in it, and you put that ice in a bag and put it down in that hole and covered it up with sawdust to refrigerate it until you used it up. The ice man came on Saturday. If he came by, and if you had some money, you bought a piece of ice. You usually got 50 pounds for 25 cents. Oh yes, we had a garden. Everywhere we lived, we had a garden, and we ate everything we grew. You know, we used it up. Seemed like the thing that we mostly grew in the garden that I remember we had all the time, every year, was tomatoes. You know, we had tomatoes and butter beans. I can remember now sitting under a tree in the backyard and shelling butter beans that we'd went out into the garden and picked early in the morning, and then you sat in the shade and shelled them, got them ready to eat. We had chickens, and when we moved, we had to move the chickens, and we always had a joke, told everybody we moved so often until when we got ready to go, our chickens knew to cross their legs so their feet could be tied and they couldn't run away until we got to the new place. Because we had some that got moved 2 or 3 times in their lifetime. You know, I don't know how long chickens really lived. Never did pay that much attention, but we always carried our chickens. Didn't have any kind of coop to put them in to haul them, so you tied the feet together and loaded them on the truck and went. One old rooster, I remember back then, chicken hawks were always around. And one day, a chicken hawk flew over, and the old roosters would make some kind of a croaking sound, you know, to the chickens, and they'd all run under the house. And he stayed out there in the yard, and that hawk flew down and tried to grab him, and he caught the hawk and got the hawk on the ground, and that hawk was glad to get away. There was a boy in our second grade class that he was 13 years old, and for some reason he didn't like me. And we lived close enough to the schoolhouse that I walked back and forth to school. And he probably didn't do it too many times, but it seemed to me like it was almost everyday occasion. Of course, he could outrun me, and I'd try to run, but he would catch up with me, and his buddy was a few years younger than him, was always with him, and he would hold me, and this guy would hit me in the stomach, and he would tell me that this other fellow was shoving his arm around there to hit me in the stomach. It wasn't his fault. And of course, I'd try to outrun him every time he got after me, but he always caught me. And my older sister and her friend, I don't know why we didn't walk home from school the same time every day, but after he had done that a few times, one day he was working on me, and my older sister and her friend just happened to be close by, and they put one whooping on that fella. He got beat by two girls. And I don't know that he ever bothered me after that. One time when Captain Bilskin brought a ship in, and I don't know what happened, but right out there at the mouth of Sanpet River, they ran aground. And the tide was coming in, so they called for some help to come push the ship back as the tide was rising. And I was working as a cook on the Southern Craft number 3 at the time, and that was the only boat the Southern International had in town. We went out there and helped push that ship back out, and they brought it on into the harbor. And when they placed the North Carolina battleship in Wilmington at berth, they closed the river off as the Cherokee, which was a big Coast Guard tugboat, brought the North Carolina in, and they had the place where they could put it into berth, permanent berth, ready. And they got almost in there, and of course the battleship draws 41 feet, and it got stuck up there in the mud, and the tugboats are pushing, and I just happened to be in Wilmington at the time on the Southern Craft number 9, and I just went out there, you know, where I could see what was going on, and there everything was going on, and somebody called me on the radio and said, "Southern Craft tug, respond, please." And I answered them, and they said, "Could you come in here and give us a little extra push?" And I told them, I said, "Yeah, be glad to." So I went right in on the stern of the North Carolina. Yeah, and of course, when you give any big diesel engine the full throttle, the smoke balls out the stack, you know. And as soon as we got in there and I pushed the throttle down to full ahead, then the smoke started boiling, and the battleship started easing. And there must have been 4,000 or 5,000 people out there on the hill watching them do that. And everybody just went to cheer and said, that's the most powerful tool.
Little but we could.
And as soon as they got it in there, a guy came right back down to the stern of the North Carolina, and he had a megaphone, and he said, look up here. And he threw something down, and one of the deckhands caught it. He said, there's your old tickets to visit the North Carolina anytime you want to.